In October 1950, the Ministry for War set up the marvellously named Flying Saucer Working Party at the insistence of Britain's wartime radar scientist Sir Henry Tizard. This first official study of UFOs quickly reached its conclusions and published a final report before disbanding in June 1951. The report would remain secret for the next 50 years. Join us on Aliens Explored as we look into the report's conclusions and speculate as to how thorough the whole thing might have been and if it had been set up to serve a particular agenda. This week's episode is dedicated to our Explorer of the Week, Toby Fomes. Toby supports this podcast through our Patreon, enabling us to continue our great UFO debate. Check out the reward schemes on our Patreon at patreon.com/Aliens Explored to find the tier that's right for you.
Aliens Explored is a weekly podcast exploring famous and obscure cases of UFO sightings, alien abductions and other strange events from both a believing and a sceptical perspective whilst keeping an open mind. I'm Stu Jackson, a professional actor and amateur ufologist with a particular interest in the crop circle phenomenon. I'll be debating that otherworldly visitations are real. The truth is out there.
And I'm Neil Kelly. I'm a professional actor as well and used to work for the military as an intelligence analyst. I'll be arguing from a more doubtful point of view. I mean, it's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it?
Welcome back, listeners, to Aliens Explored, your weekly podcast where we look at UFOs, UAPs, ETs, EVEs, and all sorts of other acronyms are available. I am one of your hosts, Stu Jackson.
And I'm your other host, Neil Kelly.
NK. SJ and NK. Let's go
SJ and NK, yeah. NK also stands for not known. So.
Not known, indeed.
Yeah.
Now, we were talking last week about you getting over COVID, and I'm glad to hear you are getting over it, even if you are still coughing. It occurred to me after we'd finished that recording, you were saying that Janet had been saying about your excessive coughing.
Yeah.
You just want to tell her it's not the cough that carried you off. So the coffin they carried you off in. Oh dear me, that's one of those really dark little ditties that we tell children, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh dear me. Yeah. So other than that, things are going well. Your new job as Mr. Monopoly, or
it's going very well.
What did we say his name was? Penny Bag?
He was previously your rich uncle. Was it Milton? Not Milton. It might have been Milton.
Well, Milton Bradley were MB Games, weren't they?
Yeah.
Is that who made Monopoly?
Milburn. He was your rich uncle Milburn Pennybags. That was the Monopoly man on the box. The guy with the, he's got the top hat and the big moustache and the sack of money. He was your rich uncle Milburn Pennybags. But in 1999, Hasbro Games officially changed his name to Mr. Monopoly. And I have to say that playing Monopoly Life Size, it's a kind of escape room game. So you go around, it's a life-size board, but it's a reduced board. So there'll only be one property on each colour. But There are 4 different boards. But every property you land on, you actually go inside it, into a room, and perform some sort of puzzle or task. All sorts of odd things. It's a lot of fun. I think naming it, I think it is misnamed Monopoly, because when you play Monopoly, the board game, what you experience is that someone, because of a little bit of a luck at the beginning of the game will be slightly ahead of you, and you'll watch them get richer and richer and richer as you get poorer and poorer, and you have to keep on going around the board getting poorer and poorer and poorer until eventually you are crushed by the monopoly and ruined. You become destitute
like life.
and bankrupted. Yeah, it's like life. That's what I believe. Some say that's what the game was illustrated to teach you. That you start off with a free market, but because it's an unregulated free market, someone, because of some little advantage, in this case luck, they get a monopoly and they just crush everyone else, and everyone else ends up in poverty. That doesn't happen in Monopoly Life Size. People might be a little bit down on the amount they started out with, or they might be a little bit up, or they might be a lot up, but no one gets really, there's not that sense of being ruined that you get on the board game. So I suspect that Hasbro Games Inc. have a bit of a political agenda, a bit of a propaganda venture. No, Monopoly is a good thing.
I'm going to take a more possibly naive view, but a better view anyway, and say, well, when it's the game of Monopoly, I know some people when they play it get very upset. And they get quite emotional about it all, and maybe that's what they're trying to avoid with Monopoly Life Size.
Yeah, I mean, the Monopoly Life Size, the game doesn't last long enough. You don't have that board game experience of going round and round and round and getting poorer and poorer and poorer and constantly, losing your properties and constantly landing on other people's property. And the poorer you become, the quicker the rate at which you become poor. That doesn't happen on the Life Size board. It doesn't last long enough. People do behave in odd ways. A lot of people book it as family entertainment. They'll book it for a birthday party or for a hen do. I haven't seen it really for a stag do. It's very popular with people from South Asia for some reason.
You've mentioned this, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why. It seems to be very popular with them. But it's also used by some companies as a corporate team building event. So they will book an entire board, and we will be aware that all the 4 teams in the room, they all know each other. And there are people who behave the way that corporate people often do when they're sent on a team building event, that they really don't want to be there. I need to be back in the office looking at that spreadsheet or finalizing that report, and because now I've got to find time to play this stupid game with my colleagues who I hate, and they act up. I don't even have to be told that it's a corporate event. I can just tell by the way when you get a middle-aged man behaving like a little kid. Yeah, then you know it's a corporate do.
So, give us an example.
They make stupid jokes all the time. They won't shut up. Because I've got quite a lot to tell them, and sometimes you'll tell them something, and then they'll start making a noise, and you have to quiet them down. Then you tell them the next thing, they start making a noise. Look, I've got to tell you, this is all stuff. Trying to get them to roll the dice, or they'll come and pick up one of the big sort of decorative dies. And as if they're going to throw that, which would probably kill someone if it hit them. Right. It's all the stupid jokes. It's the banter. It's just the odd behaviour that people wouldn't do out in a normal environment. They wouldn't do it there with their families. You wouldn't behave like that in front of their kids. So there is that. It's used a lot for team building events. A lot of companies seem to do it. I think it's ideal because you've just got a load of escape rooms, and all sorts of things to puzzle. And because a lot of the games require cooperation between the team members, and there's a healthy bit of rivalry. But as I say, you don't get someone massively winning and everyone else bankrupt. The game will never go that far. It's based on the board game. So, I don't think... but, as I say, people do get... And I think when people get very frustrated at the board game, it's because they wanted to win. And it's kind of in their DNA, I'm playing this board game and I want to win. And when they see themselves just losing and just constantly losing and getting worse and worse and worse, they don't understand that maybe that's the point of the game. This is the lesson you're going to learn from this game, that's the way it goes, just because of a little bit of bad luck at the beginning.
Well, win or lose, I'm looking forward to coming and playing Monopoly Life Size someday.
Oh, when are you coming?
I've no idea yet. But speaking of banter, silly jokes, and people talking incessantly and they just won't shut up when you're trying to tell them something, that brings us nicely on to our episode of Aliens Explored.
Yeah.
You'll say it sounds very
Okay.
much
I'll
like
go with it. I'll go along with it.
podcast when you said that.
Yeah.
But this week, we're probably going to be in a lot of agreement over this one today. The Flying Saucer Working Party.
It sounds so British, doesn't it? The men from the ministry in their bowler hats and pinstripe trousers turning up with their report.
Well, it was set up in 1950. So this is just after World War II had ended.
Well, and crucially, just after Roswell, when the whole flying saucer, when the word flying saucer came into currency, and there was an awful lot of interest in that sort of thing. Hollywood was, I think, by that time was already making. They'd switched from making sort of gothic-based horror movies to science-based horror movies. Aliens from space, flying saucers.
Yes, that's very true. But here's the interesting thing. So the guy who sort of set it up, who proposed it in the first place, Sir Henry Tizard, or Tizard, I don't know quite the pronunciation for that. Interestingly enough, he's the guy behind the radar system that was used in World War II.
Okay.
There you go. So one of Churchill's chief scientific advisors. He's the guy who wanted this committee, this investigation done, and he was given permission to. But the reason he wanted to do it, even though, like you rightly said, there was a huge amount of interest and people were suddenly taking flying saucers very, very seriously, that he wanted this set up because he was sick and tired of UFO reports being dismissed out of hand.
Yeah, I think, obviously, the guy who designed and built radar was someone who'd be very concerned about protecting our airspace. And the idea that there are these vehicles potentially entering our airspace, some people saying, oh, well, don't know what it is, well, don't bother with it then. We don't know what kind of technology has been developed. I mean, Britain had come out of a war against a technologically superior enemy. The Nazis developed all kinds of things. They developed drones, ballistic missiles, jet aircraft. Britain went to war with biplanes and a horse-drawn army, and they ran into armoured columns and with full close air support, and we got our asses kicked.
Absolutely. But doesn't that strike you? Certainly, it strikes me as odd that Sir Henry was worried that in government UFOs were not being taken seriously, given how recent the Nazi threat was, and like you say, technologically superior. You've just had Roswell, like you say, and the government. He was concerned the government was not taking UFOs seriously. I find that bizarre.
I can imagine that there will be people working in, and it wasn't the Ministry of Defence in those days. It was the Ministry of War.
Yes.
So I've got to pick up Wikipedia on that and correct them on that note. It was the Ministry for War. I suppose they would have assumed that the enemy's capabilities were similar to our own. Remember what? Lots of things happened in 1950. Oh, going back, the British people decided they were sick of conservatives, and before the Second World War was even over, they kicked out Winston Churchill and elected a Labour government by a landslide. And that Labour government did all sorts of things that we still benefit from to this day. They created the welfare state. They created the National Health Service. They nationalised all sorts of industries and utilities. They had a massive house building program. They cleared the slums, did all these things. And then suddenly, after one term of office, they're out on their ear, and Winston Churchill's back. So back in 1950, also in 1950, the Korean War broke out. North Korea invaded South Korea, and the Russians could have vetoed an American-led UN force was sent to Korea to beat back the North Koreans, and the Soviet Union could have vetoed that. They have a permanent seat on the Security Council, but they didn't for some reason. Maybe they wanted a war. But what happened in 1950 was, Britain had developed jet aircraft. Along with the Germans in the Second World War. The Germans obviously were more proactive in their use of them. British jet aircraft in the Second World War apparently were only used for home defence, for defending our own airspace. They were worried that they might get shot down, and an enemy might reverse engineer the technology, even though the enemy already had that technology. America went into Korea without jet planes, and they encountered the MiG, the Russian MiG, probably flown by Russian pilots, which had been reverse engineered from Rolls-Royce jet engine technology, which Russians had simply come over to England and just asked for it, and they'd been given the plans, and so they built these jet planes. So
they were allies.
But not by They quickly
at
stopped
the time
becoming
that they
allies
asked
at the
for
end.
it.
No. By that time, the Iron Curtain was coming down. It was clear that the Russians were the Germany had been defeated. The Russians were now a rival. Maybe there was still that vestige of cooperation. They said, "Oh yes, of course. Here, these are the plans for our jet engine, and we'll let you see one and how it works and all this." But I think because we'd gone into war in Korea, we kind of knew what the enemy's capability was. We were seeing it. We were fighting it head on. So there was that going on. So
that just adds to my confusion as to why were UFOs not being taken seriously by the British government.
That is the reason. What I'm thinking is, the Air Force and our air defence were saying, well, we know what the Russians have got. We know that they've got these big 4-engine bombers, and we know they've got these fast MiGs, the MiG-15s. So you suddenly see a light in the sky flying around also erratically. They would think, well, I don't know what that is, but that's not something the Russians have got, because if they did have it, we'd be seeing it. We'd be coming up against it in Korea.
I think I'd be more concerned about what I didn't know, like what have they got that I don't know about. But anyway, so Sir Henry Tizard has got himself in a tizzy over this. And he, with permission, he sets up the Flying Saucer Working Party. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that this was not publicly acknowledged or known about whatsoever until 2001, so 50 years later. And
that would be the 50-year rule, the secrecy.
It was uncovered by a chap we've mentioned. In fact, we've done an entire episode on him, Dr. David Clarke, and one of his freedom of information requests. So this was a very short-lived thing. It was set up. The Flying Saucer Working Party was set up in October 1950, and their final report was published in June 1951. So it lasted 9 months. And then that secret report was released 50 years later to Dr. David Clarke and Andy Roberts by the Ministry of Defence. Here we are in 2022, far more advanced in our technologies, in our ability to collate information. I mean, we're living in the information age now, and yet a government department or a committee or whatever will be asked to provide a report, and it'll take them a couple of years.
Yeah, but they didn't. They didn't get a couple of years.
This committee not only produced the report in a short space, but actually did all the research leading up to the report as well, in a matter of months. I find that really, really incredibly convenient?
It all seems as if it's a box ticking exercise, that someone's concerned that these we're seeing these phenomena in the sky and we need to look into it. They set up this committee that very, very quickly publishes a report that says that all the phenomena they studied was down to astronomical or meteorological phenomena, misidentification of aircraft, balloons, birds, and the like, optical illusions, psychological delusions, and deliberate hoaxes. They decided that in 9 months from when setting up the committee to their final report.
Psychological delusions.
Yeah, I mean that's the big one, isn't it? That's the one where they say, yeah, these people reporting this stuff are just nut jobs.
Yeah,
people who claim to have been kidnapped by aliens, or I don't know if there were reports of alien abductions in those.
It's
days.
Hard to say because they only looked at a few hundred cases, which is barely scratching the surface when it comes to UFO reports. A few hundred is nothing. I mean, statistically speaking, that's nothing. That's not enough to make a judgment on by normal statistical analysis rules.
Do we know how many people were involved in this?
Not entirely, no, because this was a very secret department.
Yeah.
Basically, all we've really got is the fact it was set up and the report. That's pretty much all we've got from it. Now, it is worth bearing in mind, though, that even then, when they've come up with these results, they've only looked at a few hundred cases. I mean, to me, it's absolutely obvious they've come at this with confirmation bias. They've not.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've not formed a committee 100%. to investigate UFOs. They've come up with a committee to debunk UFOs.
Yeah.
And even then, their own report comes up with a handful of cases that they find credible. There's three in particular where they talk about metallic discs and the witnesses are credible, the information is credible, and they exhibit sort of strange behaviours. And still the report says at the end, and I'm going to quote, "We recommend very strongly that no further investigation of reported mystery aerial phenomena be undertaken unless and until some material evidence becomes available." Well, if you don't investigate it, that material evidence is never going to become available anyway, is it?
No, we don't want to know.
It really is head in the sand stuff, that. Yeah, don't investigate it until an investigation produces something.
And I guess, Sir Henry Tizard, being the eminent radar scientist he was, insisting that these sightings should not be dismissed without some form of proper scientific study. He obviously had the influence and the leverage to make sure that there would be some form of proper scientific study, even though it wasn't actually. They just pretended it was a proper scientific study when it looks it was nothing of the kind.
That's where it gets a bit weird for me, is he oversaw the Flying Saucer Working Party. Or the FSWP, to use an acronym.
I mean, even the fact that they called it the Flying Saucer Working Party, that sounds more like a nickname for it than the actual official name for it. You would have thought it would have had more of a scientific sounding title. I mean, Flying Saucer was a popular culture kind of reference. The Working Party on Unexplained Aerial Phenomena,
yes.
Or the Working Party on studying the potential threat to our airspace in the long term.
I mean, it was allegedly a scientific study, so I can definitely see what you're saying there. At the same time, given how new a phenomenon UFOs were seen to be, I can sort of see them coming up with it. But I think it's far more likely that there was a serious study done, by a different group. And this was just a lip service project.
So, I mean, just to be clear, this flying saucer working party wasn't generally known about. The government didn't announce it publicly that we're looking into these phenomena and whatever.
Not until 2001.
And
that's the only time it became public.
Because you would think if you're just going to set something up for show, you would be showing it, wouldn't you? You'd be telling people, yes, this is what we're doing, and we've concluded that there's nothing to see. Why keep it secret if you've decided you're just going to debunk things? Well, you're not actually going to look at things properly.
It depends who your target audience is. Because if there was a serious department or group of people researching UFOs that didn't want the PM to know, the Prime Minister to know about, then, setting up a group to report to the Prime Minister that there's nothing to see here, so he doesn't investigate it further, he doesn't... Yeah. What was it in the movie Independence Day when the president is taken to Area 51 and was why was I never told about this? It's like what do they call it? Something denial.
Plausible
denial. Plausible deniability. That's the phrase. And I can see that Churchill was basically handed this information, so you've got plausible deniability.
So if Churchill was the I mean, is it possible that they set up this working party to look into it because they've given it this name? If they'd have given it a more serious sounding name, I mean, what was it Nick Pope said about it? He said it was arguably the most marvellously named committee in the history of the civil service, and I can't really disagree with him on that. If they'd have made it sound more serious and more scientific, maybe it would have gone ahead, but it's almost like they set it up with a view to, when we tell the Prime Minister about this. Oh, because I was going to say the other thing that happened in 1950 was that Churchill became Prime Minister. So did he become...
I couldn't say I'm sure. But you say you couldn't disagree with Nick Pope on that. Just by virtue of the fact it's Nick Pope, I can find a way of disagreeing with that.
Well, yeah, but...
I've got my own biases there.
Where's it? No, I think...
but no, I can see why it would be called the Flying Saucer Working Party as a catch-all term. I mean, there was even a memo from Churchill, and this is how kind of informal the whole thing was. The memo, official memo to his Secretary of State for Air, said, "What does all this stuff about flying saucers amount to? What can it mean? What is the truth? Let me have a report at your convenience."
Who said that?
That was a memo from Churchill to his Secretary of State for Air.
So just a timeline on the politics. The Labour government was voted out in the general election of 1951. So the Flying Saucer Working Party would have been set up under the Labour government, and almost immediately, I mean, Churchill would have been elected. Elections are usually in May, aren't they? General elections are usually in May. Oh, here we go. No, Churchill wasn't elected until October 51. So this was all done under the Labour government.
Right. Well, why is it public knowledge this was the report given to Churchill then?
Well, I suppose by the time the report... Well, when was the report put together?
June.
It was in
1951.
June. Yeah. Was released to UFO research. It doesn't say... So this is all a bit confusing. So it was set up in October 1950 under the Labour government. it published its final report in June 1951 under the Labour government, and then Churchill became Prime Minister in October 1951. So it's not like there's a sudden change of Prime Minister who says, "Oh, well, I'm not interested in all this nonsense." So I'm just trying to confirm the date that.
Well, that kind of makes it. And interestingly, so I mentioned that memo that Churchill sent out. That wasn't at the time of this report, to be fair.
No.
Right. No, I think I can help with the timeline a bit here. So it wasn't that report was specifically given to Churchill at that time, at the time it was released. But you see, although the report said, "Oh yeah, there's nothing to worry about here, UFOs are nothing to be concerned about," it wasn't long after then, in 1952, during the summer, and we talked about this on a previous episode, that the White House was buzzed by UFOs over a few days, even chased by jet aircraft. That was obviously a year after this report came out. It was the UFOs buzzing the White House that caused Churchill to send that memo out saying, "What's all this about flying saucers then?" And on him asking that question, he was then presented with that report. So yes, it was the Labour government who commissioned and asked for that report. I mean, I'm still going to say the same thing. I think lip service. I think lip service was paid. You didn't want the Prime Minister knowing about it, like what was really going on. So
you've got two Prime Ministers involved. You've got the Labour Prime Minister who commissioned this thing, or the Labour government that commissioned this thing. And after 9 months and a brief report said, right, that's it. That's the matter settled. That's done and dusted. And then you get a new Prime Minister who comes in and says, "I want to see that report." Gets shown it, and "Oh, well, that seems fine with me. Let's just not do anything more about it." Or certainly nothing more that we're going to tell people about.
Yeah. And that's it. There you go.
I mean, you can imagine a Tory MP like Winston Churchill was elected on the basis of being no nonsense, sensible, not prone to flights of fancy, common sense, all this. If he suddenly starts talking about flying saucers, a lot of his voters are going to say, "Wait a minute, who's this? Are we elected?"
Well, what's all this stuff about? There's nothing wrong with that. And of course, like, this was all kept secret anyway. But there we go. Anyway, we've hit that point in the show when we summarise our thoughts then. So, the FSWP, the Flying Saucer Working Party, Neil. What do you make of it?
It sounds like it was someone just paying lip service. So the Sir Henry Tizard got himself worked up about all these phenomena, and someone said, "Oh well, we better be seen to be doing something." And what should we call this? Oh, let's just call it the Flying Saucer Working Party, and then we'll produce a report that says there's nothing to see here, and there we go. So
this is one of those occasions when they're quite rare, but they do happen when you and I are in complete agreement, Neil. Because I think it was just an exercise in disinformation.
A debunking exercise. It was just set up just to say, look, there's nothing to see.
But what do our listeners think? This is what we always want to know, is, are we right? Was it just an exercise in debunking, or was there more to it? Was it perhaps a more serious look? Or is there more to this story that we've not covered? Do let us know via the usual means. You can email us aliensexplored@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter by searching Aliens Explored, or if you subscribe to our Patreon program, patreon.com/Aliens Explored, pick a tier, help support us, then you get exclusive access to our Discord server where you can chat about this and other subjects connected with UFOs and what have you with like-minded people, including ourselves. So join us next time, though, when we'll be looking at something a bit more recent, but it's still government black projects. We're going to be looking at Project. Now, depending on where you come at it, it's got several different names, this one. Project Aurora, Project Darkstar, and Project Astra. So we'll be looking at that and trying
looking forward to it.
What's going on with it, so you don't want to miss that. In the meantime, keep watching all those Freedom of Information requests, because you don't know what they might come out with even after 50 years. And of course, keep watching the skies. Take care for now.
Bye-bye.
Aliens Explored is a Feagle Films production in association with Juicy Falls. Music by Darren Mafucci and editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Aliens Explored or visit aliensexplored.com.